Well, there are questions over Greens Senator Mehreen Faruqi's place on an anti-Semitism-at-campus committee. Executive Council of Australian Jewry co-chief executive Alex Ryvchin told The Australian that her position compromises the integrity of the commission and exposes victims of anti-Semitism to further harm. He said it could also deter victims from actually giving evidence. Well, to discuss, let's bring in now Shadow Minister for Education, Sarah Henderson. Sarah, great to see you again.
Great to see you. Thanks, Sharri.
Now, given Mehreen Faruqi's history in this space, and she did vote against, so she voted against a motion that would have condemned the phrase "from the river to the sea." We know what that phrase means. She supported the pro-Palestinian protesters at university who've created a very hostile environment for Jews, and that is at universities, which is the subject of the legislation that you put forward. Is it appropriate for her to sit on this committee?
Well, I'm very concerned about it, and Julian Leeser, who's also brought forward a private senator's bill to establish a judicial inquiry into anti-Semitism at Australian University, shares those same concerns. So this is an inquiry into my private senator's bill, and hopefully this bill will be passed by the Parliament. That's what we are urging the Parliament to do. But it is quite concerning that Senator Faruqi has been substituted into this inquiry, into the bill. We are hoping there will be a public hearing, and we want Jewish students and staff who've endured so much distress and harm on certain university campuses to feel confident, to be able to come and sit before the inquiry and tell us their stories. And that's extremely difficult in that sort of environment.
So she's going to be sitting there potentially asking tough or hostile questions towards Jews who are giving evidence.
Well, what I'm really hoping is that the Senator in charge of the Greens in the Senate, Larissa Waters, might reconsider this, and that they might actually reinstate Senator Shoebridge onto the committee.
That's what you're calling for tonight?
I would like to see this situation fixed. I believe it is inflammatory. We have seen Senator Faruqi involved in some other very controversial incidents, including holding up that... She was
sign.
Actually standing next to a sign,
yes,
which was posted on her social media, which obviously showed the Star of David going into the rubbish bin. Now, she did take that down, but that was very distressing. I think a lot of Jewish groups are very distressed by the prospect of her being on this committee. So I do hope, Sharri, it can be rectified.
Now, I'm going to bring now an exclusive update to a story that I broke earlier in the year. That story was that Tel Aviv University officials were locked in a room with pro-Palestinian activists at the University of Sydney. So the University of Sydney security officials actually locked Tel Aviv University officials in the same room as pro-Palestinian activists. Well, we've obtained now an exclusive letter that Tel Aviv University sent to Vice-Chancellor Mark Scott after that incident. The letter's from the president of Tel Aviv University, Professor Ariel Porat, and it states that the Tel Aviv officials, and I quote, found themselves trapped in a room with the protesters while the university security team refrained from intervening. 2 women representatives of Tel Aviv University were forced to endure an extended period in a room with aggressive protesters, while the management of the University of Sydney seemingly did nothing. And Professor Porat described the situation as appalling in his letter to Mark Scott. He said it was a violent instance of verbal assault against 2 women. He demanded a detailed explanation from Mark Scott about what he called extreme neglect by the university for failing to take responsibility for this shameful incident. Sarah, as far as we know, Mark Scott hasn't responded, but that letter shows just how hurtful, how damaging and distressing that incident was to these visiting officials who were invited by the university to take part.
Well, Sharri, you broke that story, and it was an absolutely terrible incident where these 2 visiting academics were effectively trapped in a room, and the University of Sydney did not take any action. Security guards were outside, and as the president of Tel Aviv University has said in his letter to Mark Scott, this is an example of extreme neglect by your university. And he is actually even saying, I would appreciate answers to these questions to determine whether we wish to continue our academic relationship with our university. Now, hopefully if a public hearing goes ahead for our inquiry into the bill to establish this judicial inquiry, I will be calling Mark Scott and we will be seeking a full explanation, because this is a terrible incident of shocking anti-Semitism at the university. And as I say, this is unacceptable. And
what do you think of Mark Scott's leadership during this entire crisis that we've seen at the University of Sydney?
Look, I have raised ongoing concerns about his leadership and about many appalling actions which occurred at the University of Sydney, including the decision not to take action against Hits But to Hear members who are menacing students and protesting for weeks. The university took no action. For many weeks it didn't comply with its own university rules. I mean, it was just appalling, and this is one of the incidents. And this is another reason, Sharri, why we need a judicial inquiry. We cannot have our international reputation impacted by incidents like this. And the Vice-Chancellor owes Tel Aviv University a full explanation, including whether that relationship will even continue and how he's going to remedy it. I mean, he has actually said, what steps have you taken to show that there will be consequences for this sort of action?
Yeah, he says, have you even investigated it? I mean, it's shocking in a way to see how quickly Mark Scott capitulated to demands from the pro-Palestinian activists, but hasn't even answered a letter, as far as we know, from the president of Tel Aviv University, you know, that they have a partnership and collaboration with. It's appalling. Sarah Henderson, really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Sharri.